Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today's webinar. My name is Hannah Tawfiki from the BIBF. Just let me know if you guys can hear me, you can see me, you can write down your comments on the right corner. Okay, great. So I welcome you guys to our leadership talks. Today's session is on developing skills that make an impact in the new world of work. We hear a lot about upskilling, but what does this mean? When it comes to skills, we all understand technical or hard skills in the workplace. In this session, that is presented by Annamarie Lawrence, we will look at the skills systems in Bahrain and the different parties involved in developing skills. We will also look at the soft skills can be defined, evidenced, and developed as part of addressing the skills gap. So this session will be around 60 minutes, and the remaining we will do the Q&A. And the Q&A will be taken by the speaker, Annamarie, at the end. So if you have any questions, any comments during the presentation, you can type them down in the comment panel on the right side. I'm sure there will be a bit of interactions as well during the presentation or at the end. So now, without further ado, I introduce you to our speaker. Annamarie is a senior manager in the Center for Leadership and Management at the BIBF, who is completing her PhD on the development of future skills. She has worked between higher education, training, and labor market development for over 10 years. You can also find her published articles at the BIBF website. So over to you, Annamarie.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. I'm not sure exactly who's here. As you are all aware, this is a rather unusual setup that we're all getting used to still. So I can't see, unfortunately, who's here at the moment. And I also can't see your questions while I'm presenting, which is why, if it's okay with you, we'll leave the questions till the end. So Hannah introduced me very kindly. I'm from New Zealand originally. I've been in Bahrain 10 years, and in the time that I've been here, I've been working in this skills landscape space between education, policy, and now training at BIBF. So I'm really excited to be discussing with you today some of the data and some of the research and some of the information. So when we talk about soft skills and the skills landscape, we look at it from a number of different levels, and that forms today's agenda. So we've got the bigger picture, the labour market, education, policy, and in Bahrain that would include people like Tamkeen, Ministry of Labour. We've got the industry sectors, so we've got the different industries, and I think many of you may be from banking or insurance industry. So we have the different industry sectors. Then we have the organisations within the industry sectors, and then of course we have the individuals. So if we sort of could divide the skills landscape between these four different areas, that's where we're going to be going today with this discussion. So we'll be starting high, if you like, and then narrowing down with only a brief mention of the individual at the end. So the focus on today's session is mainly the first three areas that you can see presented there. But before we do, I just want to make a clarification around this idea of soft skills. I don't know about you, but when you hear the term soft skills, you think of something a bit wussy and a bit sort of soft and, you know, whereas in actual fact, what we call soft skills are essentially the most important working skills and life-related skills you can possibly have. So I'm changing the name of them for the purpose of this presentation to power skills, because I think that better represents what these skills actually bring. While we're talking about them as soft, wussy skills, we're not really giving them the credibility that they need in the workplace and in professional development. So I'm going to use the term power skills during this presentation. Now also, And I think academics could debate with us about the difference between power skills and 21st century skills and foundation skills. And while I appreciate there are differences, I'm lumping them all into a similar terminology for this discussion today. So 21st century skills, employability skills, foundation skills, power skills. They're essentially the skills that we know that you develop that are not hard technical skills. So in Bahrain, I've heard many times over the years about the need to develop critical thinking, the need to develop better time management, and we often call them employability skills. I am aware that people could argue there are differences between them, but for the sake of today, this is what we're talking about. We talk about power skills. So just a little bit about skills, first of all. When we talk about hard technical skills, we all understand what they are. They're things that are easy to learn, or maybe not so easy to learn if you're learning something like coding, but the point is the pathways for learning them are quite clear. They allow you to be able to do something at the end of learning them, often known as technical skills, and they're usually easier to measure because you can either do it or you can't do it. When it comes to the power skills, we tend to find that they're exhibited more in behaviours. Or processes of thinking, which you could determine as behaviours. Now, we may see the outcome of those power skills, whether they be good or bad, in the form of poor communication or poor decision making, but you very often can't actually explicitly learn them and point to where they're being used in any given situation. And this is one of the challenges in looking at measuring power skills, and I'm going to go through that a little bit more as we go on. So they're difficult to measure. They're often inherently learnt. We often learn them sort of in our family environment or through mimicking people when we're young children, or behaviours of others that we learn these power skills from. So they're not black and white, and therefore they're a little bit more difficult to develop and learn. Yet despite this, these are the skills that you will find a number of places will say are missing in Bahrain. When I came here 10 years ago, I was given a skills gap analysis study that was done. And those of you who have been around in this space a while may remember that in 2009, the Allen Consulting Report did a very big study identifying the skills gaps in Bahrain. And while they also identified that, we don't teach dentistry here and there's certain hard skills that are missing, they also identified a number of soft skills or employability skills that were missing. So this discussion about the skills gap has been going on for quite a long time, and it's generally considered by policymakers as a bit of an issue, a bit of a problem. And this is not just Bahrain, this is globally. So when you look at what the skills problem actually is, I just want to make reference to a few different sort of reports and things. Some of these are global and some of them do focus on Bahrain specifically. So if we have a think about the World Economic Forum, they produce every year a future skills and human capital report. They published in October this report, Future of Jobs, where they stated in there quite a bold statement that more than half the employees will require significant skilling, upskilling, reskilling by 2022. Now that's not far away, we're almost in 2021, so that's a pretty big statement that they made. So the World Economic Forum is concerned about skills on a global scale, and as I said, this problem is not by no means just a problem here in Bahrain. The skills gap problem is global, although it does look different in different countries. Some of you may remember the FinTech Bay 2018 talent report, where they had done a survey about what are the skills required to grow the sector. Now, obviously, there were some technical skills, software development, blockchain development, that sort of thing. But there was also identified a number of power skills, creativity, problem solving, communication, teamwork. These were identified as skills needed to develop this industry in Bahrain. Bahrain Economic Development Board, who do a great job in helping to marry foreign direct investment and the skills that the Bahrain market has. Essentially, their job is to sell the fabulous human capital you have here in Bahrain. They're working too with the World Economic Forum on something called the Skills Gap Accelerator. This is a global project by the World Economic Forum, and Bahrain is one of only a few countries who are actually actively involved in piloting the Skills Accelerator program. So this Skills Accelerator is looking to address these skill gaps, identify them and address them in Bahrain. So they're doing a lot of research around that. Baytech.com are a recruitment firm who do an annual study every year looking at different countries in the Middle East. And in Bahrain, when they were asked, the employers here, what skills are required the most for this year, for 2020, they were told that the ability to work under pressure, creativity and communication were the three areas that employers in Bahrain believed that are missing from the labour market here. It's always interesting when you think of skills. Ability to work under pressure could be described as resilience or stress management or something else as well. We often see different names for the same kind of skills, don't we, when we look at these sort of reports. And then, of course, the Global Competitiveness Report, which I know Bahrain has got some fantastic rankings, especially when it comes to e-government and e-readiness. The human capital ranking is fairly good. However, there are some areas that could be improved in the rankings if we had a bigger investment in skills. One of those main areas would be research and development. Research and development, or research, is a skill that you can learn. And the university collaboration indices doesn't score particularly well for Bahrain, unfortunately. And university business collaboration is very often where that transfer of skills and that knowledge of information about what the labour market needs is actually given to training providers and education. So it is a very important indices when you're looking at skills development in a country. So just looking a little further at the World Economic Forum report, 2020 report, as I said before, they reckon that 50% of people will need upskilling, and in fact 40% of those will need upskilling in the next 6 months. So that's huge. Once again, they cite critical thinking and problem solving as top skills that are needed. This one is repeated in every study in Bahrain, outside Bahrain. Critical thinking, problem solving, critical thinking, problem solving. It's seen as a fundamental skill for growing an economy. And having a very competent labour force. But interestingly, in this World Economic Forum report, there have been a couple of other emerging skills. Self-management's often cited as an area that's needed in employability skills, but within the context of a post-COVID environment, it's self-management in the sense of active learning. So self-directed learning, self-management, the ability to grow and develop oneself through learning. Resilience, stress tolerance and flexibility. So there's some interesting findings there, but they're not entirely new. Now there's some very good practice. Sorry, I'll just show you the list of all of the skills that they said would be the top 10 by 2025. And you'll notice that with the exception of the 2 technology ones, just about all of them are power skills. So very, very, very big focus on power skills again. And in the post-COVID environment, these sorts of skills are seen as being enabling adaptability, flexibility, and coming out of this post-COVID environment. So really important skills. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the bigger picture stuff now. So that's by way of an introduction. So if we look at the labour market in education and we look at the industry sectors, and I want to focus a little bit on what's going on internationally, and then we're going to talk about Bahrain specifically. So if we have a look, first of all, I just want to tell the good news. In the 10 years that I've been here, we've seen a lot of good practice develop here in Bahrain around this. So those of you with children in government schools in Bahrain will know that they are now including critical thinking and some of these power skills in the national curriculum. There's an emphasis on the importance of children developing these skills from a young age. Here at BIBF, we are also looking at power skills. We do digitalisation, digital training, and a lot of the power skills are embedded in that training, but also through leadership and management programs. I find it really interesting if you look at what the professional frameworks are for some of our international bodies that we work with, such as the ILM or Chartered Management Institute or the Chartered Institute of Professional Development. A lot of the competency or the skills frameworks or professional standards frameworks, whatever they choose to call them, will actually have in there a lot of the skills that we would call the power skills. So what they're actually trying to develop through their professional qualifications are in fact very often power skills. So that's great news because it means that what we offer in the way of leadership and management training can be used to actually upskill and develop some of these power skills. I know that some of the higher education institutions in Bahrain are starting to look at these employability skills quite seriously. I came to Bahrain to work for Bahrain Polytechnic, and when we came, we mapped all the employability skills to graduate profiles, and learners were required to, or graduates were required to have these skills and demonstrate them in their student consulting projects before they were allowed to graduate. I'm just going to say a quick shout out to any Polytech graduates there, because I noticed one or two of you had signed up, and I was very excited to see your names there. So thank you for signing up. UOB as well has its 21st Century Skills Framework. And the Higher Education Strategy of 2015, when we were writing the strategy, we embedded the employability skills as a part of the areas that are going to be growing. So it's embedded within a lot of these things. And by embedded, I mean, there's not a course called employability skills. Here you go and study this course. They're embedded throughout all of the curricula, which is good practice, and internationally they would say it's good practice. Now, the area that I'm really interested in, and I want to hear from you guys, and I'm going to show you my contact details at the end of this, because I want to hear the stories from industry about where you see the good practice of these skills being developed in industry. So if any of you work for an organisation where you can see power skills being developed, actively developed, and how they're being developed, I would love to hear your story. So I do know that Babco, KPMG, Batelco, they also have curricula around future skills, and they emphasise that. I know Babco has its academy that looks after foundation skills and some of the basic skills, and obviously for those required in the industry, which would be more engineering oriented. So yes, once again, I want to just invite you to please tell me if you can give me some examples of good practice in Bahrain in industry, because I'd really like to hear those. So I'm just going to show you a slightly bad news slide, and I'm going to come round to why I'm showing you this in a moment. This is some from the Chamber of Commerce. It's from June. I'm not sure if there's an updated version, but what it's telling us is that we're looking across a number of different industry sectors at the sectors changing, downsizing or changing. So unfortunately, we are looking at layoffs. Now, the percentage of the layoffs for expats versus Bahraini, we don't have that information here, but you'll see some of the sectors such as tourism and hospitality tend to have quite a high number of expats. When we're talking about skills here, we are talking about the skills for Bahrainis, for developing Bahrainis. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here. So when we look at this chart here, we want to talk about it in the context of Bahrainisation. So because we don't have that breakdown, we can't actually see just how much it impacts Bahrainis versus expats. However, the point is a lot of organisations are struggling, and a lot of organisations are looking at potentially laying people off. And that means there's going to be people who need reskilling. And there's people who are going to need to look at taking their skills and transferring them to another industry sector. So let me just tell you a couple of the things that are being done globally around this. So first of all, in the UK, and this is a funny one because it was actually a similar story in Bahrain too, when you roll out a software system, a digital system for doctors to use in the primary care clinics, that's basically your family GP or your family doctor, and they weren't using the system, they were digitally illiterate. These doctors tend to be very, very good at medicine and aren't always the best at technology. So, and this is the same everywhere. So this was the case in the UK and it was documented. It's also, I would argue, the case in Bahrain. I've heard a similar story here. So what happened is because of COVID, these doctors were suddenly forced that you're going to have to learn this thing or you haven't got a job. You know, you have to sink or swim. If you want any appointments, you've got to learn how to use the system. So all of a sudden, within a 3-month period, 90% of the primary health appointments were being done by digital means, and the doctors were using the systems, which was great news for the national healthcare system because they had been trying to get these guys engaged and girls engaged with the system and it hadn't been working. So this is an example of rapid upskilling because of COVID. In Ireland, and I know that it's not just Ireland, there are other places as well, where they've taken some of the skills from industries such as hospitality or tourism, and they've looked at how those skills can be used in other professions. So for example, if you're a great, let's say, waitress, you've got good customer service skills. Those skills are transferable to other industries. If you're very good at a hotel receptionist role, and you get laid off, then that can, you're still good with people, you're still good with interpersonal skills, you're still good with customer service. Where else can you reskill and work? Perhaps you can reskill and work and apply those skills instead in a call centre or something like that. So these are the initiatives that some governments are taking around looking at reskilling. And in Ireland as well, they're offering people who have been made unemployed to reskill in a completely different industry, looking at some of the growing software industries such as cybersecurity and software development and that sort of thing. The UAE has a job portal where they're matching people who are unemployed register, and they're looking at sort of matching supply and demand of jobs. So those looking for people go in and they're trying to match the supply and demand. They're also providing advice through this portal on how to reskill, what industry sectors you could look at that would be interesting for your transferable skills if you've come from one sector to another. In Australia, vocational education, which is training and applied education, polytechnic and so forth, they have developed a short course or short nano qualifications. They're actually qualifications, but short nano qualifications that can be taken for free. They partnered with the regional state government of New South Wales, which is the state where Sydney's in. And they are offering these courses for free online. So along with that, they're also partnering with industry to offer free placements for work experience for people to see if that's an area that they can apply their skills to. Now that takes a lot of coordination between employers and government, and apparently it's worked very well. So it's almost like an adult internship, if you like, or a work experience taster. So people can see how their skills are actually transferable into other sectors and give them a little bit of experience so they can hopefully get a job there. So I just wanted to show you some of those skill initiatives. Now this study is really interesting. So it's by an organisation in the UK, and what they were looking at is recognising that post-COVID, we're looking at a very different type of workplace. We're looking at a different work culture. We're looking at a level of resilience, flexibility and things that haven't really been needed in the workplace up until now. So the study that they did, and they've got quite a lot of nice data in their study, but it was a study across the UK in tourism, hospitality, retail and aviation. And it asked this question: what are the skills that you would need for a culture change and resilience and growth of your business going forward after COVID? And these were the skills that were mentioned, and you'll notice there the first one, which is particularly interesting. So if you have good customer service, that's a skill that you have. It's a skill you can be taught, you can improve on. But this point here is about creating, about developing, I guess, empathy around your customer service and awareness of what the customers require. And it's actually been included as part of the new skills needed. So as you probably know, if you think about your family and friends, everybody has a different level of personal sort of safety at the moment. There are people who are really nervous going out. There are people who are fine going out. A customer service person's ability to recognise people's sense of anxiety or comfort and adapt their service to that is a skill that has not really been needed to this extent before. So that, for example, is a changing skill in the customer service industry. So you can see there's some of the others: managing uncertainty, motivation, active listening, persuading others to change their minds or behaviour. So influencing skills, bringing people together. So this is what this organisation, I think they interviewed 2,000 people, employers, and this is in the UK. And this is what they said that they believed would be the most helpful skills for moving forward out of COVID and developing some resistance and culture change in their industry. I want to focus on Bahrain just for a second and look at some of the skills gaps across a couple of industries here. First of all, financial services. This comes from the EDB skills survey data from last year, so it is last year's data. But we can assume it's fairly similar. So they're asked every year, how's recruitment going? What challenges do you have? What skills do you think you need? What are the hard to fill jobs? And this is what they said. But what I found really interesting is on the this emerging skills and emerging jobs. Now, we all know data analytics is emerging, we all know that, but whoever would have thought that people would say storytelling is a skill that is emerging, innovation, leadership, adaptability. So it's a really interesting area that people are starting to look at and recognize these power skills are actually emerging skills. And they're emerging skills because of digitalization, because of COVID, and what is now being dubbed the double disruption, the disruption of COVID and the disruption of digitalization. So it's seen as an emerging skill, which is interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling later. And in the manufacturing sector, you can see there that they have quite a lot of the skills outlined in, under the soft skills there. Presentation. Now, they didn't actually specify whether that's personal presentation of oneself or presentation skills, so we'll have to just interpret that. But what's interesting in Bahrain is that across these different sectors, you don't have a common agreement about what the skills are in the sector. Every organisation tends to have its own idea of skills, its own competency frameworks, and there's never really been a consensus across industries of exactly what these skills may be for an industry. So, for example, in Europe, you will have what they call the occupational standards, So the occupational standards will outline a particular skill that's required for a particular job, and that a combination of them forms a job description. So there's a very clear pathway between education to employment of the skills that are needed or the skills that need to be developed to get somewhere and where you want to actually go. And part of the difficulty of developing and measuring power skills in Bahrain is that we don't have that benchmark, if you like. Everyone is sort of doing it on their own, thinking about what they think it looks like for their sector. So if we were to consider soft skills for a particular sector, and we'll take this manufacturing example, and if it was agreed by all the employers and it was led by the employers that in this industry, presentation skills are really important. They're lacking. Our people are coming into Babco, Alba, food Mondelez and not having these skills, or we're missing analytical skills, and this is what it looks like in this context. Because if you bear in mind that some of these skills look very different across different contexts. So if you're in manufacturing, your customer service will look very different than if you're in telecoms. Manufacturing, your customers will be mainly internal, perhaps. Analytical skills will look very different. In manufacturing, perhaps your analytical skills is about understanding the automation systems. In telecommunications, maybe it's, well, let's say call center, it's your analytics of your call numbers and times and things. So different sectors will have different interpretations or different requirements of the power skills. And that's why in many countries there's been a organisation of skills in certain sectors so that they can be transferable between jobs in the same sector, and so that it's really clear the career pathways and the progression routes that are needed to grow and develop within the sector. Now, I want to show you an example of that for just 1 second. That's going to involve me hopping out of here briefly and sharing my screen with you in a different way. So just bear with me for 2 seconds while I do that. So I hope that you can all see this website. This is an organisation called People First, and this is what we call a career skills map. Hannah, can you just give me the thumbs up to tell me you can see that okay? Okay, good. So this is a really nice little tool. I want to show you something, and this is what we're talking about. Now, I can't see this necessarily being in every single industry sector in Bahrain, but it's just a nice example for you. So let's say you are a receptionist in a hotel, and you quite like your career path. You want to know what you earn, what you can do. You want to know the skills that are required. And then you want to know the career pathway. So if I'm a receptionist, I can see I need to be a head receptionist, I need to go there, and there's a career pathway. I can look at the training, and it tells me that these are the certificates that I need. Now, this is very much training. It's not qualifications, it's not degree qualifications, it's training. So as a receptionist, that would be what I need. Let's have a look at somebody further up, the front of house manager. So there's an overview, and there we can see he or she is only a few away from the top. Let's look at their training. So this is where it gets interesting. Have a look at some of the things up here, because I'm not sure if the colour coding actually represents technical qualifications versus soft skill qualifications, but it sort of looks like it might. So here you have to be able to do 360 appraisals. front of house manager. It's not something you would think of necessarily as a training pathway for a front of house manager. You need to do personal branding. You need to understand what personal branding means. You're representing yourself, you're representing the company. You need to do basic management. You need to do these world host qualifications, which are international certification to say that you're experienced in how to, in the hospitality sector. Practical training, and all of these different things down here as well. So it's very clearly mapped, and there's a really clear career pathway for these people. And you can see over here, you've got the whole entire hotel area, events management and waitress and host. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the type of thing I mean when I'm talking about a career map. Now imagine if we had that for banking. Here we've got the CEO, and then we've got all the retail and the all the different sectors of banking. And you were able to click on it and know exactly what your career pathway is and what you need to do to get to the next step in the career ladder. I'm just going to flick the screen back to the slides. Won't be a second. So I wanted to show you that to give you a little bit of an idea of what I mean by skills pathways. For this to happen in Bahrain, it needs to be employer-led, because ultimately it's the labour market that determines the skills that are needed, and then education and training follow in behind that. So something like this, and I'm well aware that there has been quite a lot of discussion through different industry bodies. I know that Tamkeen has industry sector representation and so forth. So it is very possible for us to develop a clearer skills pathways for different industry sectors in Bahrain. I now want to talk about organisations, specifically at the organisational level, which is probably where you guys are more familiar with when it comes to skills development, either by being an employer or by being an employee. So what responsibility do you have in organisations when it comes to meeting the skills gap? I know from having spent 10 years talking to employers in Bahrain that they're often saying that they're not getting graduates out of the university who necessarily have the skills, and they're usually referring to power skills. I've heard this many times in my years in Bahrain. So there's still it's still very much cited that there is a skills gap around the power skills and people coming out of education into employment. So what is the organisation able to do? How do you grow these power skills while you're in the workplace? That was the title of this presentation. So now that's all the background stuff. Let's talk about this for a second. So this is based on some research and personal observation about some of the tendencies of HR in Bahrain, that recruitment focuses more on credentials and qualifications than on skill. So your university degree and your GPA, maybe where you went, tends to be the focus more than skills. Now, maybe it's because the expectation of graduates is that you're not going to necessarily graduate with many skills. And therefore that recruitment has become normal. So even the way CVs are written and things, they're still very credential oriented rather than skills oriented. And saying that though, I have met some recruitment managers who tell us that the development of individual skills using nano learning, things like Udemy and Coursera, have become more important to CVs when they're recruiting. So that is shifting as well a little bit. The other thing is when it comes to skills development, it's training's often is considered an event. There's a big difference between training and learning pathways and learning journeys, and I'll talk about more of that in a moment. But it does seem to be a bit of a tendency here that HR sees training as an event rather than a journey. And the power skills are often not aligned to performance management systems. If they are in a competency framework, and many organisations I know have competency frameworks, these are often not linked to any actual development that's done. So you may see them in your annual performance review, and someone may say, well, have you been empathetic this year? Excellent, tick. Have you been good with your interpersonal skills? Oh no, you had a fight with that person. No, you'll get that mark. And that tends to be the extent of it. So it's not particularly meaningful. And part of the reason for that is because of the tendency to also have annual performance appraisals. I want you to imagine for a moment you have an employee who maybe doesn't have particularly good communication skills. They're very shy, they don't speak up, they don't take initiative, and maybe you've been in this situation as a manager or as an employee. But imagine if you have a person like that in the organisation. They're a good, diligent worker, but their communication skills can be improved and their confidence can be improved. Imagine sitting down with them once a year and saying, well, this year you did your job really well, but your communication needs work. This is, I want you to tell me what you're going to do to improve your communication. Okay, you're going to read some books. Great, go away and do it. And I'll see you next year and we'll talk about it. And that's not very effective. So when you're looking at actually developing power skills, you need to look at changing the performance management cycles to include more regular coaching conversations in that cycle. And there's a trend across HR and mainly driven out of the US by organisations like Deloitte and GE. There's a trend of moving towards regular skills conversations rather than the annual performance review. So imagine the difference between that versus a manager who themselves has the skills to have coaching conversations, because you are only as good as your line managers when we're talking about these types of mentoring skill development programs. So you have a line manager who's good at having those coaching conversations, and they sit down with that same employee every month. Hey, let's have a chat. Sometimes it's just informal. Let's have a cup of coffee. How are you doing this month? We talked about you improving your communication a little bit. Have you done anything this month? Can you give me some examples? I noticed that you've been spending more time working on that project. Is there something in there you can tell me about? So you're getting the person to talk about their skills experiences through these skills conversations. And this is actually being recorded as part of a performance appraisal, but it's not the big 1 year, great big bang, you didn't do anything right this year type of discussion. And this actually follows the themes of continuous improvement. Any of you who are in the quality areas will know that feedback cycle and those feedback loops in quality management, continuous improvement, are really important. And it's the same here. If you want anything to improve, you need a regular discussion, not a once a year discussion. The other tendency is to prioritise technical skills. That's everywhere in the world. They're easier to train for, they're easier to measure, and you want people to be able to do things. So if we remember that the power skills change behaviour, yet the technical skills allow you to do something. And ultimately, a very skillful person will have the best of both. So if we think of a comparison between sort of a training focused approach to skills development and a learning journey focused approach, and it doesn't matter whether you're in HR or you're not, I'm sure everyone can relate to this somehow. Even if you're not working, I think you can relate to this. And you look at the different sort of ideas behind the two. So training is an event, and you need to train this, you need to learn this. A learning journey is a progression, and it takes a longer time. So the old way is of evaluation focusing on the course and self-reflection. Did you like the course? Did you learn something? If you didn't, well, no, maybe it's because the course wasn't very good. The new approach focuses on changes in behaviour over time. So when we're looking at power skills, we're looking for changes in behaviour. And ultimately from those changes, people do things differently. So this is different to the technical skills where you're looking for someone just to do something. With power skills, you're looking for changes in behaviour that lead to a different outcome or a different output of something being done. So training is under the old system is often classroom based, and we know that that's changed rather rapidly now. But in the new ideas around the learning journey approach, training has multimedia and multi-delivery mechanisms. So training may be a face-to-face, it may be an online course, it may be a nano learning piece from somewhere like Coursera, or it may be a regular subscription that you have to a professional development website in your area, like My Future HR that I subscribe to, or it may even be just little learning messages. When those are combined well, and you've got an HR L&D person who really knows what they're doing, that becomes a designed learning journey. That becomes a full pathway, and those multimedias form different parts of that pathway. And often they reinforce learning with each other, because learning doesn't stop at the end of formal training. It is the journey of constantly being reminded. Remember to practice your emotional intelligence today. Remember to listen before you speak. It's a reinforcement, and technology allows us to do that. There are apps now that you can integrate with your existing software systems in an organization that will send you notifications around specific areas of learning that have been programmed that you need to learn. And we're going to talk about these employee engagement platforms a little bit later. So the point is, there is the idea that learning has multimedia delivery, and some of that's on the job, and some of that's formally on the job in the way of mentoring, coaching, even these coaching conversations that I was talking about. But most importantly, the new method integrates learning with performance. So employee engagement and performance are outputs of learning rather than separate from learning. And not many industries do this at the moment. And there's some great examples, mainly from overseas. I haven't seen many from this region, but there certainly are some examples of this being done. So each company in the same industry does its own thing, the old idea of training. Like, we all need training. We're a bunch of bankers, we need training and negotiation skills. We're a bunch of people in manufacturing, we need training and negotiation skills. There's little industry-driven differentiation between the training or recognition, except for the tailoring that the trainer themselves will actually do. And I know they do a good job of doing that at BIBF. But wouldn't it be great if some of those skills had clarity across the industry first? The trainer could look at what are the industry standards for these skills and the level of employees that I'm going to be training, and they can see a really clear idea of what the learning needs to focus on, because there is an industry-wide standard of what's expected or what these skills mean in the industry context or for the industry. The old model of HR's role being organising training, quite administrative, to HR being designing learning journeys and learning maps and identifying skill gaps and engaging across the industry and representing the industry. And I know many HR professionals already do that in Bahrain. So ultimately, training should not be an event-based activity, it should be a learning journey. And this is where we're going to with it. Now, that's been a very long-winded way of getting to what we're actually here to talk about, which is the impact of power skills. This is something that you can't talk about without going through some of the ideas about how we develop power skills. So I don't want to get too fluffy and esoteric here, but just to talk a little bit about how sociologists say that we develop these skills. So we're all meaning-making machines. Human beings add meaning. We socially construct ideas around what things are and how things are. And by that, we mean that we consider our view of reality and the environment around us. We add meaning to what we think it is. And then from that, we build out an understanding that then forms a collective understanding. And that collective understanding will often be called a culture, whether it be a national culture or an organizational culture. But sociologists are crazy about this idea of social constructivism. So we socially construct our reality. So if we socially construct our reality, that means that we are responding to our environment in ways that we have previously socially constructed, often in childhood. When a person does this, I respond like this. And that's often part of it's so innate in us, we don't even notice we're doing it. So let me give you an example from communication. I think we all are aware that communication is relative to your perception of the situation. But you have a communication experience with a colleague that seemed rather negative. You respond because you think that person was behaving in a certain way that led you to believe that it was a negative engagement, and you react to that, and then it becomes a negative engagement, and therefore you may form a habit that every time you see that person you feel a little bit prickly. So that's an example. You've socially constructed something, and it may have not even happened. It may have been your meaning that you added to it wasn't actually correct in the first place. So social constructivism helps us to understand how we build these power skills and whether or not they can be learned, because this is really the big part. As adults in the workplace, can we learn these skills? I would argue, yes, we can, but that may be a debate for another time. If we create self-awareness, see what happens is our learning creates self-awareness. You come to a course on emotional intelligence at BIBF, and you learn about emotional intelligence. You will hear things in a different perspective. Now, you may have heard them before, you may have heard someone talking about this stuff, but you're out of your normal context, you're thinking about it from a different perspective, and your thinking changes. And hopefully, you develop some self-awareness around this. That means that you become more aware of your unhelpful habits. And when your awareness of your habits starts when you become aware of your habits, you can start to change your habits, the ones that don't serve you. And when your habits change, your behaviour changes. When everyone's behaviour changes, we have a culture change. Then we have change. So power skills come from a sense of development of power skills come from an awareness of bad habits, things that you do maybe well as well, and the habits lead to change. Now, I can't ask you the question because you're not in the audience, but I'd love to know, do any of you have any idea how long it takes to form a habit? What do social scientists say, how long it takes to change a habit? You can't actually tell me, and I can't see the chat, so I'll just jump in and tell you, but if you've typed it, you can see how correct you are. So in a study in the Journal of Social Psychology, it says that research has shown that it's taken between 21 and 254 days to change a habit and therefore change behaviour. On average, 66 days. And we do performance appraisals once a year, and we do courses and expect people to have changed after the course. So this puts into perspective the time element of learning these skills and applying these skills and changing behaviour. It takes time. 254 days is it's 3/4 of a year. So if it's going to take you 3/4 of a year to see the impact from your AI training you did in January, as an organisation, you may not be sort of waiting around to measure that return on investment. So it's a difficult one to measure because you have to look at it over a long period of time. You have to look at it in a learning journey context rather than a one-off event. So now that we have some idea of this, I want us to think about what this looks like in organisations. And I've called this the prerequisite to be able to measure power skills. Because there is a certain amount of sophistication needed in an organisation and their understanding of learning journeys to really be able to effectively measure the impact of power skills and ultimately the return on investment. And it's not something many organisations are naturally comfortable with because it is a bit of a new way of thinking. So first of all, your HR needs to have some understanding of social science methodology and research, because this type of impact assessment is it's rooted in social constructivism and therefore requires social inquiry as a form of being able to find out what's going on, why it worked, how it worked, and ultimately measuring the impact of something. So your HR needs to have a different set of skills to what they've had in the past. And I know our fabulous CIPD team here teach research methodology as part of the certificate for HR professionals. You also need to have a very clearly articulated and defined idea about what those skills look like in your organisation and in your industry. And I'm going to go back again to what I was saying about the unit standards, or having an articulation about what these skills look like. What does good customer service look like? What does good communication look like in your industry, in your company? Because they're not the same across every industry and every company. And therefore you have to be able to articulate that in your organisation. Now, very often people will have some of those things in a competency framework, but what they actually look like when they see them is a little less articulated. So you need to have an agreed definition, an agreed understanding, organisation-wide, but preferably industry-wide as well, as to what that actually looks like on the job for people in that industry. And as I said, that can be very different across different industries. You need to understand that learning is an iterative process. It's not a linear process. So learning can only happen over time. Development, it's more about measuring development than it is about measuring an isolated event of learning. And that learning is integrated. It's not just the formal learning, it's integrated with on the job with everything. So if you're looking at a holistic development model for learning and you're looking at measuring that, you're going to take a different approach than if you're going to be looking at simply, what is the return on investment for sending my staff to negotiation training? It's going to be different. And then, of course, as I said before, the multimedia channels of learning. So using some of the interesting tools available now, nano learning, learning hacks, different things that help you to reinforce a message. And when it comes to soft skills or power skills, this is quite important. If you think about where industries moved with things like design thinking, suddenly customer empathy has become at the forefront of some of the power skills needed, because if you have empathy, you understand the needs of who you're designing your products for, and the design process looks very different in that context. So these are prerequisites to organisations being able to measure power skills, according to the research that I've done. Now, those of you in HR will be very familiar with this model. It's a good old classic. It's been around for quite a while. The problem is with this model that we kind of do level 1. We might do a bit of level 2 as a self-reflection survey. So you go to training, you know, you say, oh yes, I really like my trainer. That was great, tick, tick. You come back to the office, your HR sends you a form. Yeah, that training was good. I'd recommend it, tick, tick. And then kind of for level 3 and level 4 are kind of just filter away and they're missing. And that's because level 3 is really hard to do, because we're going back to what I said before about measuring behaviour and measuring change. So not many some organisations do, but as a whole, this model is not well applied because it kind of stops at level 3. People don't quite know what to do there. I want to present to you a idea of training that by this guy Birkenhoff. He's Swedish, and if any of you have read this book called Telling the Training Story, you'll understand this method. But it's very much based on the idea that training is changing behaviour. It's a social intervention, and therefore it applies social science methodology. So it's taking, when I say social intervention, it takes what we would call on a larger scale an intervention approach, because if you remember, like, and I'm not sure if this is the case in Bahrain, but I'll take the case of smoking. Smoking's bad for you, and at some point it became law to put warnings and ugly pictures on cigarette packages. That's what we call a social intervention. You're trying to change a behaviour, trying to change a habit of, in that case, the whole of society. In my country, we had a similar social intervention around wearing seatbelts, and there were TV ads of babies flying through windows and because the car stopped suddenly and horrible things like that, that actually changed social behaviour and to wearing seatbelts. So this is what we mean by social intervention. And training is, on a smaller scale, a social intervention, and therefore should follow that sort of social science evaluation methodology to measure impact. The method starts with some assumptions. Now, I haven't talked about training needs analysis, but if we have to assume that the person is on the right journey in the first place. We have to assume that what's been selected for them is the right thing, and it may not be. And in amongst this method, there is also methods of not so much, we wouldn't call them training needs analysis, we'd call them learning assessments or learning needs analysis, but a development type of area that's missing. And I can talk a little bit about that at the end when we talk about assessments. So that it starts with the assumptions and the expectations of an impact, because you have to have a very clear idea of where this training is going to lead to. What is it you actually want out of the organisation for this training? So what they do is they survey the participants. This is very similar to what most people would do with the Kirkpatrick model level 2, and say, and they ask these questions around: did you see the training as successful, and did you see it as unsuccessful? And they try and identify, and this is where this method's very different now, they try and identify the extremes of both. So in a class of maybe 40 people, let's say you send 40 people off for training, they'll try and find perhaps 2 people who said it was outstandingly successful, I'm using it in my job, it's brilliant, and people who said it was unsuccessful. And by the way, what I mean by successful and unsuccessful is how they feel it helped them in their job. Then, where it becomes a bit different, and then where we're fulfilling level 3 of the Kirkpatrick model, is they conduct qualitative interviews with those people. So what they're trying to find out here, and this is the missing link, I believe, in training impact, they're trying to find out what exactly made them change their behaviour. Describe the behaviour that changed because of this training. What did the training do that made you change that behaviour? What happened after the training? What were your thought processes that led to that change of behaviour? Can you tell us what happened in response to your change in behaviour? Can you tell us what the business value of that change in behaviour is? Can we follow this through and see actually how you impacted a bigger picture here? And likewise with training that was unsuccessful. But the most important part is that it's discussed within the context of the performance factors that support the learning. So how has this learning impacted your behaviour that therefore impacted performance? So now we're getting to talking or telling a performance story, and that performance story allows us to really measure the impact. Just to give you a comparison of what we're talking about here, now you don't have to be in HR to get this. I think you can all get an idea of the difference here. So the Kirkpatrick model assumes that training is the cause of business impact. We do training and there's going to be an impact and we can measure that. The success case method, or the Birkenhoff method, recognises that while training is necessary, learning is necessary, it's not necessarily formal training, but performance is actually the driver of the impact. So there's only impact if it changes behaviour that changes performance. So we want to see the performance that changed. There's attempts to isolate the contribution, so this training had this impact, rather than an integrated learning journey, and we're going to look at the performance system and how learning happened within the context of that performance system to get results. It also implies that if there's training failure or lack of impact, that must be the training provider's fault. We hear that at BIBF sometimes. But in the success case method, it assumes that the training success is coming from the fact that it's integrated with the performance management and learning journey. And you can see some of the other things there. One important thing is that the Kirkpatrick model is often based on quantitative data. In other words, 5 out of 10, 3 out of 10, we can draw nice graphs from. The big difference here with the success case method or case study method is that we look at the mechanisms that drove success or failure. We look at the narratives of the story that drove success or failure, or we look at the narrative of the performance story that drove success. And data is usually qualitative, which is why, going back to what I mentioned as the prerequisites of HR, they need to have that social science ability. So you can see we're actually talking about something quite different from what's done. And I would love to hear if anyone feels that their organisation applies some of these things. So there are other tools. I've got about another 5 minutes. How am I doing for time? Just 1 second. Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm going to stop in about 5 minutes. If you just give me 5 more minutes, then we'll finish up, because I really want to hear from you and your questions around some of these things, or your input, your discussion. So other tools for evaluating power skills. 360 feedback's had a lot of popularity lately. It's a little bit like, what's it called? The research methodology, where you have to triangulate your data. So it's you saying what you think, it's your boss, it's your colleagues, it's other people, and real 360, you could even go home to your family and ask them. And so it's talking about other people's observation of your behaviour, which will probably give you insights that you wouldn't have got otherwise. So it's a very good tool when we're looking at measuring power skills, because you're getting the observations of other people, assuming that they spend enough time with you to make those observations. Self-reflection and learning development stories, which are very much part of the success case method idea. Qualitative interviews, which have already been mentioned in there. And there's also formal assessments that you can do. One thing, BIBF has a fantastic assessment centre, which I believe could be utilised so much better by our banking partners and other organisations we work with, because there is the tools that allow you to undertake, quite sophisticated tools, psychometric tests, that allow you to undertake an assessment of the power skills of people in your organisation. Many organisations use these for recruitment, but they also use them as part of training needs analysis to identify the power skills that they may want to develop. And we actually have a test that we can align with your competencies. So the in-tray assessment looks at how people interact, their interpersonal skills, it looks at their critical thinking and problem-solving skills, it looks at their communication skills. So there are actually formal online assessments that you can come in and use at BIBF's Assessment Centre that will give you some of the answers to how your team are developing power skills. But I would just go back to reminding you that this is really something that needs to happen over time. So if you're measuring in the beginning, you need at least a year or so before you're going to be looking at measuring at the end and actually hoping to see some different impact and different change from them. So I'm just going to briefly tell you an example of the types of evidence, if you like, that we would hope to see from some of these learning stories. Now, this is a slightly crude example, because emotional intelligence, there's a lot of talk about it, and it's one of those fluffy ones that people don't quite know what to do with. But if you think of what are the actions of somebody with high emotional intelligence, and you read the book, you'll find that they're there, things like empathy and good communication, listening, that sort of thing. So this is what you would see if you're going to do emotional intelligence. And I've picked a few of them here, and then I've tried to give examples of the actions you may see on the job as part of a self-assessment, as part of a narrative portfolio of how the person feels they're developing, or even as part of a 360 if you're looking or observing these in a colleague. So they demonstrate self-awareness, and you're hearing them say things like, I could have done that better. Oh, I didn't like the way I did that, but I'll do better next time. They're demonstrating a sense of self-awareness. People with emotional intelligence are not emotionally reactive. They think before they speak. So a person will not react, they'll think before they speak. They benefit from criticism, and they take on criticism that they'll learn from. So on the right here is the narrative of what you think, or what you may hear people saying when they're doing emotional intelligence. Now, this can be a bit weird for people if they don't like that sort of social science ideology, but this is generally considered the way that we assess how people are doing well with power skills. So narrative of doing, they tell a story of doing. They demonstrate empathy, and I always try and put myself in the shoes of the customer. They keep commitments and they turn up on time, emotional intelligence. So it's what we would do with this is, if we were looking at including emotional intelligence as part of a competency framework for your organisation, we would look at some of the evidence of this being enacted on the job, and we would probably be looking at it from multiple different points of view, maybe observation, self-reflection. We would be wanting to see a change in behaviour over time. We want the individual to recognise that about themselves, because this is a learning journey. We don't come in the day after they've just done an EI course and expect that they'll come up with be able to articulate these things for themselves just yet, because this is a learning journey. But my point in this is it's a journey that people can develop. They can learn. If it's not something they've had, they come into a job with not particularly high levels of EI, they can develop them. You can learn these things. So we're going to just talk for a second about different organisations' readiness to really be able to contribute, measure, articulate and develop power skills. And I put it across 4 different levels here, and I'm nearly done, so bear with me. And if we look at this base level, there's an agreed understanding from employers of what skills look like in their industry. We are talking more about power skills here, so I'll say power skills. A skills map framework is designed industry-wide, and companies have active engagement with higher education to make sure that there's that gap between education and employment is as little as possible. So this is a base level. The next level would be industries agreeing on a set of professional standards that are used to build organisational competency frameworks. So organisations and performance management systems can be built on an agreed set of professional standards for an industry. And obviously there are the technical skills which tend to be the focus, but also the power skills. What does communication look like in the oil and gas industry? What professional framework are we going to put around looking at how people manifest or exhibit communication well in this industry? The next level is the organisation's performance management system, because remember, skills should drive performance. So the organisational performance management system follows a multi-delivery method. There's a learning journey approach. We have people in HR who are having these sociology conversations to try and identify impact and change in the organisation and change of behaviour. And the industry has specific skills pathways that are data informed and updated and contributed to led by employers. And I guess the ultimate would be, and I think probably the best example of this is someone like Deloitte's in the US, where we have an integrated career pathways from education to employment for every industry, mapped and aligned to funding, TAMKEEN, utilising an apprenticeship model. Now, this is a really interesting point. I'm just going to talk about this for 2 seconds. It's become really popular now, especially in the UK, but also across Europe, for professional apprenticeships. So you leave school, you want to go into banking. You have 2 choices. You can either go to university and study banking and finance, or you can get an apprenticeship in a bank. And so for 4 or 5 years, you work alongside your degree program. So you still get a degree, but a lot of the degree work that you're doing is on the job, it's applied. So everything you're doing is in the context of your employer. And this is the apprenticeship model goes back hundreds of years, from when father and son taught son how to do iron, make horseshoes with iron and, some of those more traditional trades. But it's being used across all industries, all sorts of industries. So banking is being used, accounting. You can go into the likes of KPMG as a professional apprentice in the UK, and they will teach you through your accounting qualification. At the end, I think it takes you slightly longer, but at the end you come out with a degree, but you also have the work experience and hopefully a job as well. So you're using an apprenticeship model. You're engaging with higher education and you're involved in that skills development system. You're offering apprenticeships. Your performance management system is directly aligned to skills and jobs, and everyone can see the progression pathway. They know what they need to learn or what skill they need to develop to get to where they want to go, a little bit like that map I just showed you before for hospitality. And if you're really funky, you have an EX platform, which is an employee experience platform. You've probably heard of CX, customer experience. Well, this is employee experience. So imagine a platform that tells you all your usual HR portal, my pay slip and all that sort of stuff, but also incorporates a learning management system, links to online learning, a whole nano learning thing. It's integrated through APIs and apps with an AI technology that's able to map your learning journey for you. So you need to develop communication skills. It gets all the things every day, pops something out at you. It may just be a little thing that pops up. Hey, have you thought about thinking before you speak today, or something like that? And it's an integrated learning journey that's facilitated by technology. And this is the great thing that technology can do for us now. So that is really the ultimate. And I've said that these levels of organisational readiness for a real focus on skills development, they're part of my research, so they're not necessarily set in stone. I haven't had them validated yet by any professors. So, but this is an idea of the different levels of sophistication that we really need to have in order to be able to do this well. So I'm going to end in just a moment. But there's a lot more we could talk about with the individual, because ultimately we are responsible for our own learning and development. We are responsible for our growth and where we want to go in the industry, in our careers. So ultimately, there's a lot we could say about this area, but I've run out of time. So I'm just going to say one thing, which is if we all have the mindset of lifelong learning and we pursue the self-knowledge, because the beginning of knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, as Socrates said, then we can engage with the skills process. But I'm just going to end by giving you my contact details, and there's my LinkedIn if you would like to contact me. But just as a form of a conclusion, I would really like to see us to have a little more structure around the skills pathways and across industries in Bahrain. That way we can align what's needed with funding and actually be able to measure the impact, because that is the part that's really missing, because we've got nothing to put our hat on. There's nothing to compare it to. We don't know what that should look like because we've never articulated it and written it down. So I'm really hoping that in the future we're going to see a little bit more of a direct transition there from education to employment and these career pathways. But now I'm really curious to hear from you. So thank you for listening. Hannah, have you got some questions for me?
There's one question, Dana. She says, don't you think that measuring my skills depending on people might not be too good or accurate? Because I might lie instead of saying the truth so I can improve myself.
So she's asking if people are talking about themselves, they're not necessarily telling the truth.
Yes, and it might be too good or accurate. They're not sure what it is.
Okay, so this is where the skills have to be articulated. An organisation has to know what they're actually looking at here. And your own self-description of your personal growth is generally subjective. So it would be fair to say you're right, Dana, they're not necessarily accurate when it's purely you're self-describing and subjective. That's why methods that include like a 360 approach would be more accurate over time. But there also needs to be evidence of it. You can say, oh yeah, I've become really good at communication, but you have to actually be able to point to examples, evidence, other people that somebody can refer to. There has to be some doing in it. It's not just a learning process. There has to actively be some doing in it. I don't know if that answers it.
Okay.
What else do we have there?
We have another question from Dawood regarding the layoff. in tourism and hospitality sector. Is it due to COVID that's why this sector is the highest sector for laying off?
Yes, well, I'd assume so. The study that I showed you with that graph was from Bahrain Chamber of Commerce, and it was done in June, and the study was done in the context of the COVID situation. So I'm very much assuming that it was directly a result of COVID, and that was in June, so it might look quite different now if they ask that question again.
Okay. One more person is just saying employees need to be better educated on how to measure these power skills.
Yeah, totally agree. If you have a manager who has no clue about this, you're not going to get a very good performance appraisal on your power skills, and you're not going to have very good performance conversations. So absolutely, it is a system approach. The system needs to be upskilled on how to upskill.
Okay. So I think we don't have more questions, but if anyone can have any more questions, let us know. We'll still be here. So great. Thank you, Annamarie. Thank you all for your questions. We appreciate you being here. I hope the session was very useful. I personally enjoyed it. It's especially the website that you shared us. I think it will be very useful actually to share it with them, to the attendees. I totally agree with the appraisal part when you spoke about it. Instead of once a year we do the appraisal, it would be better to meet up with your employee or your management once a month, you know, and talk about any improvements that they need to do. Because, you know, when you do the appraisal by end of the year or something, you probably forget all the stuff that you did during the year. So I think we have one more question. Is the career path approach really realistic? Or like if every single employee is to grow and occupy some higher positions, what will we do with the employees already occupying these positions? That areas served by their inferiors.
So you're saying if the career paths are there, what about the people who are already currently in those positions? Was that right?
Yeah.
Well, the point of a career map, and remember, we're looking at business growth, so we're kind of hoping, and the future of work, the big point of it is that things are going to change. Jobs are going to become obsolete, new jobs are going to become important. So I guess the whole discussion is in the context that there will be a bit of a reshuffling and a change. So it's very likely that there will be progression opportunities. I mean, there's always going to be a situation where you have to wait for someone to retire before you can step up. That's quite normal. You know, career pathways don't go the way you want them necessarily to go. It's often a natural progression as organisations need to make that shift. So yeah, that's kind of a normal evolution, I guess, of jobs and organisational growth. But is it realistic? It's quite a big task to do on a minute level, but on a macro level, yes, it is realistic, because all it entails is getting employers together to discuss what the skills look like. And we could even say the high level overview of what the skills look like in their industry, and then communicating that to education and training and making sure they're all at the party talking and documenting it, because while lots of discussions happen, they don't often come with any results that can be implemented. But when it's documented and it's defined and it's aligned to good practice or benchmarked internationally, and we have qualifications, training, and clear, tangible career pathways, then you can actually implement something. But I think the discussions seem to happen a lot, but that part of it nothing seems to happen out of it to that extent. So I do think it is feasible. It is a bit of a big job, and there's certain sectors where it will be easier than others. For example, I personally think in banking it would be relatively easy to do, and even think to implement things like professional apprenticeships in banking would be easy to do. So I think it's definitely doable. Any other questions?
Okay, good. We don't have more questions, but everyone is thanking you for a great session.
Thank you for listening. You never know. I don't know quite how long I talked or if it was interesting for the whole entire time, but thank you very much for listening. As I said, I invite you to give me your feedback. You've got my email address there. I'm particularly interested in if any of you have stories about really good practice, because we want to tell the good stories in Bahrain and celebrate the success of organisations who are doing this well. So please get in touch with me. I'm going to be, Hannah's going to be sending out a survey, a very, very brief little survey for you. If you don't mind filling it in, I'd really appreciate that as well, to give us some more insight into this, this area. So thank you all.
Great, thank you, Annamarie. Just to keep up to date with any upcoming webinars, events, you can visit our BIBF website or visit our social media accounts. We do have a lot of soft skills courses here. I attended most of them, like creative thinking, emotional intelligence, time management, and team building. It really helped me in my workplace and my personal life. This session is recorded. I think some of you guys asked about it. We will be publishing it online on the website, and we will be sending it to you, to your email, with the PDF file, and if anyone missed the session. So thanks again for joining us today. We will see you next time in our other events.